For those of you who don't know, the Talmud is not one book. It is a collection of books. It is a collection of writings. And it's huge, huge. They say it's 6,000 some odd pages long. And there are two different Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud, and then there's the earlier Jerusalem Talmud. To make it really simple, the Talmud is a collection of extra-biblical writings that expound on the scripture and Jewish law. Christians should approach the Talmud in exactly the same way as they approach the writings of Paul. Christians should approach the writings of Paul in exactly the same way as they approach the Talmud. And how should they approach Paul and the Talmud? In exactly the same way as the noble men of Berea did in Acts chapter 17. They didn't believe Paul because he claimed to be an apostle. They didn't believe Paul because he claimed to be a man of God. They didn't believe Paul because he claimed to be moved by the Spirit. They tested him. They took every concept of his teachings and they bounced them off the scripture. What was considered to be scripture back in those days? Certainly wasn't the New Testament. Much of it wasn't even written by then. And the New Testament wasn't even considered to be scripture at that time. They tested Paul by the so-called Old Testament. They tested Paul by the Tanakh. Anything that Paul said that did not line up with the Tanakh was considered to be false, rejected. Anything that Paul said that was contrary to the Torah, to the prophets, was rejected. In the same way, Christians should test the Talmud. Anything that it teaches that is contrary to the Tanakh should be rejected as false. Any new concept that contradicts the Torah, the prophets, the Ketuvim, is false. So if you find 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 things in the Talmud that contradicts the Tanakh, should you throw it out? Absolutely not. Remember, the Talmud is a library. A library can have a lot of good information in it. Just because there's one teaching in one book or 3 different teachings in 2 different books, does that mean you're supposed to burn the whole library? It's ridiculous. In the same way, the Bible is a collection of books. It is like a library. And just because Paul contradicts James or Jesus or the Torah doesn't mean you throw out the whole Bible. Don't put your faith in the men. Yes, I said men because it's not God. The men who put together a collection of books and put them all together in one book, slapped Holy Bible on the front. Just because they included the letters of Paul in there does not mean that the letters of Paul are equal to or greater than the holy prophets.